train wreck, a violent, destructive crash involving a train, or the definition that we like to use, or the definition I'm talking about here today, an utter disaster or mess, a disastrous calamity or source of trouble. That's essentially what we're seeing here from this debate that took place over the weekend. This thing was a disaster, to be sure. I mean, when we look at what was going on, when we look at how this debate developed, it's clear to me that it's unmistakable that this thing was, on one side you had Biden, who, I mean, it's amazing that his team allowed him to continue the debate after so many public appearances where he was stumbling and incoherent, after so many public appearances where he fell, literally, not just stumbled in his speech, but stumbled physically, or looked like he was having, physical issues or issues controlling his, bodily functions, and all kinds of reports that came out over, a couple of years now. And then Trump, it was clear to me that both of these individuals are in this race because of their ego, not because of their love for this country. And it became even clearer as they began to talk about their different policy positions, because the policy positions from these two individuals lets me know that this country is in a disastrous state of affairs. There's no other way to say it. I want to point out 4 U.S. policy disasters that were highlighted by the debate. And neither of the candidates, and to be honest, none of the American leadership, none of those who are in the political class or the leadership class of this country have presented clear plan for how to get us out of these disasters. The first of which is Ukraine. I don't know how else you describe it, but the Ukraine war is, in my mind, a complete and total disaster. There's no way for me to understand it any other way than what it is. Look at this. Russia is making daily tactical gains in eastern Ukraine as concerns swirl around Ukrainian military reporting. Look at this. Every day we're getting more reports about what's going on within this Ukraine war. None of them look good. Russia is opening new front lines or new positions, extending the front line in the north. They're making slow gains in the east. They're stretching Ukrainian forces thinner and thinner as they're relocating, and they're trying to recruit. When you see these videos of Ukrainian men being pulled off the street, when you see these videos of Ukrainian citizens trying to hide their young men so that they don't have to go out to the eastern part of Ukraine and fight and die in this bloody war. When you see all of the graves and all of the horrific toll that is taking place in Ukraine on its citizens, how else can you describe this as anything but a disaster? Look at the maps. These maps aren't getting better, they're getting worse. Because every time a new map comes out, you see more and more territory being taken over by Ukraine or by Russia. You see now even territory that the Ukrainians had fought diligently to recapture during their last successful offensive. You see that territory being regained, and at a cost of thousands of lives. And it doesn't matter which side's casualty reports. We get into the weeds about casualty reports and who's losing and who's how much they're losing. The reality is that people are dying in mass number on both sides, and that is a calamity that during this debate and throughout the presentations from our government, no one has given us what the clear policy objectives are for the United States in Ukraine. What is the positive outcome that will be achieved that will make the citizens of the United States, their lives better, the citizens of the world, their lives better. What is that? It has not been articulated in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Just want to encourage everyone, if you've not done it already, to join Access Pass, our members-only program, to help the channel grow and to be able to provide more frequent broadcasts to our viewers. Here's one of the outcomes of the war that is unmistakable. It has drove Russia and China together in a way that they were not before. It has drove Iran and Russia together in a way that they were not before. So if you're saying this war is going to somehow make the American citizens safer, well, show the proof of that, one. And two, if all of America's enemies that America has worked very hard to cultivate over these last decades are now coalescing and forming an alliance, a new world order is emerging that will challenge the United States hegemony, how are we safer from all of this? When you see North Korea, who even Russia was helping to isolate before this Ukraine-Russia war, now we're hearing reports that Putin will not only be sharing food and resources and helping to nullify the sanctions that the world had placed on North Korea, but that Putin would himself would be organizing arms shipments to increase the lethality of the North Korean military. This is a catastrophe for the West. The fact that this country, who the West has spent so much time and energy trying to isolate and force to give up nuclear weapons, is now not only not having to give up the nuclear weapons, but the sanctions have been nullified, so you don't have that as a pressure tactic, and the weapons will be enhanced as a result of the relationship between Russia and North Korea. This was, I don't know how you can call, I don't know how anyone can stand on the stage and call this a foreign policy success, this Ukraine war, this notion that we can ignore Russia, this notion that Russia's security concerns are invalid, such that the West can do what it wants, bring NATO right up to Russia's border. Let's put some military bases and nuclear missiles right on the border with Russia, and think that it was not going to backfire. And they've not articulated any plan other than when the Secretary of Defense came out and said, our goal is to weaken Russia. I don't know if that's a goal or if that's a statement or is that a desire, but it doesn't seem like a well thought out plan that's going to make the United States safer in the long run. And now you hear from coming out of this war that could have been prevented. A lot of times I talk about it. It's not just that the war could have been prevented, but even once the war started, there were plenty of opportunities and off-ramps earlier on to negotiate a settlement to this conflict. But now, because of the administrations in Europe and the G7 countries, we find ourselves in a situation where the reports coming out is that we are headed towards a World War III. Look at this. World War III is imminent without Ukraine, historian predicts. NATO risks World War III in Ukraine while lining the defense industry's pockets. They seem to be the only winners in this. The military industrial complex in the West, as well as in the United States, seem to be the only winners in this Ukraine war. It's certainly not Russia. It's certainly not Ukraine. It's certainly not the people within the Western coalition. It's certainly not the United States citizens. Our lives haven't been made better. We've been made poorer. Our defense hasn't been made better. If anything, the defense of the United States has become more difficult as the enemies of the United States begin to coalesce and form not only an economic bloc, but a military bloc. So we are less secure as a result of this war. And now we see that we're moving towards the United States dispatching more and more advisors or troops to fight in Ukraine. Ukraine warns of World War III ahead of long-stalled Congress aid vote. Ultimately, when these elections are over, the plan by the liberal governments is to send troops to Ukraine. They're already sending troops. They're already putting advisors in Ukraine. They've already started the process. We remember this from Vietnam, how they put advisors in these countries, and it would always start off at a low number. But by the end, you know, in Vietnam, by the time you got to the end, you had 40, 50,000 advisors. And these people weren't just sitting in offices somewhere. They were fighting out on the front lines in trenches and in the jungles of Vietnam. It was a total farce, a way to declare war without declaring war. And we see that through these escalations in this conflict in Ukraine. And the question is, how is it making, not only are we losing, is Ukraine currently losing this war, but it's doing the inverse of what the leaders told us it would do. It said it would weaken Russia. That hasn't happened. It would eliminate the sanctions. We're going to cripple Russian economy. That hasn't happened. All of the things, Ukraine could win. That hasn't happened. All of the nonsense reporting from the Western media, you know, the corrupt Western media, have come to nothing. And none of this came out in that disastrous train wreck of a debate. They tried to maul around the edges, but it was a total train wreck. Now, look at this. You would think that they would spend more time talking about nuclear conflict. When you have leaders like Macron wants to open debate on European nuclear deterrent. If a conventional deterrent, and they say deterrent, but these are offensive capabilities. The conventional capability of the Europe is sufficient to prevent any incursion without a high price being paid. So it's really about an offensive capability, the ability to threaten, the ability to bully. There was no need to bring NATO to the borders of Russia. NATO is not a defensive alliance. And you keep hearing people say that because it's kind of their way of gaslighting, that letting you believe that NATO is a defensive alliance while ignoring all of the offensive actions that NATO has taken in the last 30, 40 years. It's a farce. Ukraine war latest. Russia says it is considering nuclear shift and tells West it is playing with fire. U.S. leads drills after North Korea warhead test. We are moving to this policy that the United States has as it pertains to Russia, as it pertains to Ukraine, it can only be described as a train wreck, a complete and total disaster. And it's moving towards not just a disaster for the US and Russia and Ukraine, it's moving toward a global disaster as we are pushing the world closer and closer towards nuclear conflict as a result of this imperialism, this expansionism. And in the midst of all of it, the one thing that was not mentioned in that train wreck of a display, I hate to even call it a debate. It was such an embarrassment, such a disgrace to the people of the United States of America, many of which are good, decent people, to be subjected to that debate as if they were idiots and could not see before them two people who in any other generation would not be standing on that stage. It was a disaster. It was a total train wreck. And the other disaster that did not come up in the debate, that was not mentioned in any serious way, was the toll that this war is taking on the Ukrainians. While the United States may have its objectives and Russia may have its objectives, and this proxy war continues on within Ukraine, what about the Ukrainians? What about their cities? What about their towns? What about their children, their seniors, the men, the women of Ukraine who are suffering tremendously as a result of this foreign policy disaster, as a result of the United States pumping up, advocating, pushing them to a more strident. You know, I heard Zelensky say something catastrophic. He said that the war would not end unless Russia was pushed out of all land and Crimea was returned to Ukraine. If with all the aid that the West has provided, if with all the munitions that the West provided during the offensives, Ukraine was not able to recapture anything but a little town called Robotny. No one in the world outside of Ukraine, and perhaps some in Russia, had heard of the city of Robotny before the war. The town, I don't even want to call it a town, the village of Robotny. You mean to tell me thousands and thousands of people died? Millions of equipment was expended in this little, small, unheard of, insignificant in the grander scheme of things to the world town. And it was a total failure. And you're still going out and saying that the war will not end until we push Russia. Do you know how much money, the magnitude of escalation it would take to accomplish the task that this guy Zelensky is talking about? It is a disaster. Do you know not the catastrophe, the type of bombings and you know, you would have to imagine that troops from all over the West would have to be engaged, aircraft and you would have to have naval powers in the Black Sea from all over the West in order to accomplish this task, because it's clear that Ukraine cannot do it on its own. And when these troops, NATO troops and other troops come in, don't you think that North Korea and China and Iran would be sending troops from the other side? This would be an epic and total catastrophe. And that's what the problem is. There was never articulated in the debate a plan for how this war should end and what the goals are for the American people. How are we benefiting from this catastrophe? Now, let's talk about another thing. Let's broaden it from the Ukraine and talk about this train wreck of American foreign policy from a broader perspective, because our foreign policy as a whole is also a disaster. Disastrous Israel-Iran tensions test limits of U.S. policy amid Gaza war. The United States policy towards the Middle East as it pertains to the Israel-Palestine conflict have been a disaster for the last 40, 50 years. It has been the discussion and creation of the two state solution was the beginning of a disastrous, long, winding path towards an inevitable failure that would have never happened to begin with had they not gone down this path of talking about this two-state solution. There cannot be, there will never be, mark my words, there has never been enough support for a two-state solution for it to be a viable solution in the Middle East. There is not now, nor will there ever be, enough political support in Israel to allow the Palestinians to have their own state. It has been a far-fetched, nonsensical plan since its original construct. The reality is, and I think it has become clear, that the reality is that the United States supports the deportation of the Palestinian people. Joe Biden doesn't have to come out and say it, neither does Trump, neither does anyone. Their plan, by their own actions. See, one of the things that you learn in political science when you study it is not to listen so much to what leaders say, but to focus more particularly on the actions the government takes, especially when those actions are protracted over a long period of time. The United States plan, the official policy of the United States, I'm not talking about what these nonsense spokespersons are saying, is to continue to allow the annexation of Palestinian land and to, over time, piece by piece, force the Palestinians out so that there is a unified Israeli state that controls and occupies all of the land in question. That is the United States official policy. Anybody that tells you otherwise has not been looking at the facts, not the statements, not the nonsense, the BS from, this spokesperson or that spokesperson. And if you can't come to that conclusion from the facts during this particular conflict, and this is not the last conflict. There will be another conflict where everything will be destroyed in Gaza. There'll be another conflict, and in each time, what will happen is the Israeli control over land will increase. This is, they wanted to push people into Egypt, push people out into other places. The main thing is to continue the pressure tactic. And the question is, how will that plan, that neither one want to say because they think it's politically unpopular, and in truth, it is politically unpopular because people's humanity will not allow them to come to a realization that that is the United States official position. And so they don't care how many Palestinians die. That's always been irrelevant. The reality is that America wants these individuals gone, has always wanted them gone, and increasingly has has come to the conclusion that these people resign themselves to the reality that it will happen by force. That's just the truth of the matter. You can be Muslim and support the Democrats, or Muslim and support the Republicans, or anti-Muslim, whatever it is. Regardless of your political affiliation, you have to say that that is the American policy at this time. And ultimately, it has become a disaster for foreign relations throughout the Middle East. Look at what it has done in the middle. Saudi Arabia is moving away from us. All these other countries are moving away from us. Iran is becoming more hostile. Look at what's happening in the Iran relationship. How Iran defied the U.S. to become an international power. Russian-Iran cooperation and threats to U.S. interests. Why Washington has struggled to find the right policy formula for Iran. All of the conflicts in the Middle East, all of the tensions have only served to make the enemies or adversaries of the United States more popular, not only within their countries, but more popular throughout the region, and have created the coalescing of regional forces against the United States' interest. And so when we talk about the Israel Hamas war, when we talk about the foreign policy as it relates to United States and the Iran, all of it is turning against the United States. It's clear that the United States foreign policy has become a total basket case. They have no strategy for how to contain or how to normalize relations with Iran. And now at this point, Iran, China, Russia, and others from the global south have created a coalition where you no longer can bring them back in from the cold and try to have a peaceful resolution. This is a ongoing battle that the U.S. will have with the Middle East, with Iran becoming a permanent thorn in its side, because Iran will be backed by powerful players. And some of those powerful players are making inroads into allies like UAE and inroads into allies like Saudi Arabia as a result of so many missteps from American foreign policy. Look at what's happening with China. America can't stop China's rise. When you look at the U.S.-China relationship, there is no way that you can call it anything else than a train wreck. And nothing that was said through this debate can clarify a position that will restore or reimagine the relationship that the United States and China will have. U.S. wanting to prevent China from becoming a global power is a farcical objective that cannot be achieved. China will continue to grow in strength, both militarily and economically, and the United States has to come to grips with that and determine what type of policy will enable it to live in a peaceful, cooperative world where these two superpowers are a fact. They exist. and they're not going anywhere. When you go to Africa, after failure in Niger, U.S. Africa policy needs a reset. So if the United States foreign policy is failing in Israel, it's failing in Iran, it's failing throughout the Middle East, it's failing in the Pacific with China, it's failing in Europe with this war in Ukraine, and it's failing in Africa. You tell me you step back, and how can you call it anything other than a train wreck? And on that stage, neither of the candidates presented a coherent plan to restore some sense of American leadership, some sense of American presence in these areas that is not destructive, but that is constructive. When you look all throughout Africa, they are moving away from the United States, moving towards China. They're moving away from the United States, moving towards Russia, moving even towards India. There are other global powers that are increasing their influence, both militarily, economically, throughout the continent of Africa. And the United States and the West are being pushed to the fringe. France and Germany and the US, these countries that had major influence over the continent, its resources, its people, its governments. All of that is diminishing right before our eyes, and there's no plan articulated to restore that. And my thing is this: if you're going to do a presidential debate, I don't want to hear two candidates debating about bathrooms, debating about who slept with which person. I don't want to hear a debate about nonsense issues. I want to hear a debate about the economic, the political, the military issues of the day, the geopolitical positioning of the country, and how this country will be made better. I could care less who uses which bathroom. I could care less about some of these other stupid waste of time concepts that they spin on the debate, talking about who can win a golf tournament. I don't care how many golf tournaments you've won in the last year. For me, that's irrelevant. What matters is, what are you going to do about this emerging BRICS coalition? How will we position ourselves in the world to deal with the economic challenges of a bipolar world? Look at this article. Will BRICS expansion finally end Western economic and geopolitical dominance? That's the discussion that needs to be had during the debate. Is this new alliance that is emerging, and it's not just emerging, it's an expanding alliance. Countries are clamoring to join BRICS group. South Africa says. Russia takes up leadership. It is amazing how fast countries and their leaders have begun to flock towards BRICS. The United States, through its constant pressure tactics of sanctions and aggression throughout the world, have created enough enemies that these enemies are now coalescing, and they are not just moving gingerly, they are sprinting towards a new bipolar world. From an economic standpoint, BRICS is important, but I believe that the economics leads to the military strength. So without economic strength, without the ability to control your country, the ability to insulate yourself against sanctions, you can never have military strength. And without military strength, you can never have autonomy. And this is the situation that the West is facing. They have used the combination of economic pressure and military intervention to keep themselves atop the world. But now that those things seem to be unraveling, this war in Ukraine has proven that there are limits to the West's conventional military capacity and production, as well as the coalescing with China and Russia as the backbone of this geopolitical shift. Now you're entering a world where people no longer are afraid to say, we don't want your economic view of the world. We don't want to be exploited. We don't want to sell our natural resources at less than favorable prices and conditions and terms. We want an alternative to your currency and to your system of a global domination. And what is the United States talking about? They're talking about who won the golf tournament, who's a better golfer. And they're actually live on television talking about golfing while the BRICS expansion is taking place, geopolitical maneuvers are being made. BRICS countries could swing an economic wrecking ball at dollar dominance even without a shared trade currency, from former White House economist says. Think about it. This would be a major destabilization of the Western economy, because the Western economy is based upon controlling the means for trade. When you control the means and the processes, you control all of that, it gives you an advantage not only to pressure countries to do what you want, but it gives you an advantage in the marketplace. And the United States and the Western powers have benefited exponentially from the control of the global financial system. If more countries begin to trade not using SWIFT, not using the US dollar, begin to trade in local currencies, even if they don't have a unified currency, this will diminish the impact that the West has and the West's ability to impose sanctions on countries that don't do what it wants, either economically, militarily, or values. Because remember, the West does impose sanctions on countries for their religious values. You see countries in Africa saying we're not against the things that you're against. We have religious values. We believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, and we want to preserve. And as a result, what does the West do? They put sanctions on their economy. What happens when these countries begin to isolate themselves from these sanctions? By developing the types of currencies and the types of exchange mechanisms that no longer give the West those pressure points. BRICS prepares to launch currency in 2024, and the BRICS currency is supposed to be a digital currency, a digital transaction system that enables countries to use their native currencies, which is far more powerful than using a single currency where these countries don't have control over the currency itself. And it's such a big deal. And, Trump has acknowledged at least that this is a crisis. Trump advisors discuss penalties for nations that move away from the dollar. That's what the debate should have been about. It shouldn't have been about golf scores or who's sleeping with which actress or any of that nonsense. It should have focused exclusively on the real issues of the day. How do you regain the trust that the world once had in the United States, in its dollar, in its institutions, in its neutrality, in its temperance as it pertains to using sanctions and export bans? There was a rules-based order, and it only works when the referee tries to be neutral and tries to be decent to some degree. There was always some manipulation, and all of the countries in the world knew that. But when the corruption and the manipulation becomes too much to bear, now you have a situation where people are pulling out of that system. They want a new global system. They're pulling out of U.S. Treasuries. Look at this. China's holding of U.S. Treasury securities is constantly going down. China is decoupling itself from the West. It is moving away from the U.S., not only in its economics and its dependence on U.S. technologies, but its use of the U.S. dollar. It is these countries in the global South are moving away from U.S. leadership in the world. And what is the U.S. leadership, the presidential debate candidates and the legislators, what are they talking about? They're talking about bathroom bans. They're talking about burning books and which books you can read in classrooms. Does it matter which books are in the library if the kids can't read? It doesn't matter what's in the books. Half the kids can't read. So it's irrelevant. I mean, we're so focused on irrelevant issues, we are missing the issues of the day. Let's look at this fiscal policy. We're in a disaster of fiscal policy. The national debt is over 34 trillion. It's time to tell the truth about the U.S. government's finances. How can you allow the United States national debt to hit $4 trillion and that not to dominate, to completely dominate the debate? 34, just let that sink in just for a moment. $34 trillion. U.S. debt on pace to top $56 trillion over the next 10 years. And this is not something I made up. This is the Congressional Budget Office. This is their projections. So I see people come on and they attack me in the comment section after the program is over. But the reality is I'm just reporting to you what the Congressional Budget Office says about these issues. I'm reporting to you what is going on where you have factual information. In 10 years, ask yourself this question: is this sustainable? Can we sustain $56 trillion? Do you know how high taxes will have to be in order to sustain? Let me show you how high it's going to be. Look at this. This is the trajectory of the U.S. debt. Here is the projections of U.S. debt over the next 20, 40, 60, 40 years. When you look at these projections, you look at where we've come, you look at the things that brought debt up, but after a while, debt would come back down. But as you continue to see, we're in a one-way trajectory where debt is just going higher and higher and higher, and very little is being done to bring the debt down. Once again, Congressional Budget Office. Don't attack me. I just presented it to you. I know it makes people mad when they hear this, but this is a reality of another train wreck that is getting ready to happen in the United States. Look at here. Interest cost exceeds spending on other programs. When you're paying $339 billion in interest, let that sink in for you. 330. You want to know why China can't be stopped from becoming a superpower and a leading force in the world? You want to know why? It's because we're spending so much of our money on debt service. That money could have been for roads, airports, bridges. My goodness, you got bridges collapsing all over the United States. The infrastructure bill they did was just a drop in the bucket. It was nothing. And it didn't really get at the heart of the problem of the decay and the rot that is taking place all throughout the heartland of the United States. It's because people don't have good paying jobs. They lack the skills, the education in order to compete in an evolving economy. And you can't invest in education in America because it's always a racial issue. Education spending is tied to racial animus, and that's what prevents us from actually competing, because the resources are distributed in a biased way based on prejudices, prejudice against rural communities, prejudice against the poor, prejudice against single mothers, prejudice against Black people, prejudice against Hispanics. We can't create a coherent plan to expand our economy with education as the cornerstone of it, because there's so much prejudice associated with the education systems in America. It's funding, it's implementation. Some people, we want our children to have a better education than them, more opportunity. What they don't realize is globally, everybody in the country is losing. We're all losing. Regardless of your white supremacy or whatever you want to believe, or your anti whatever it is, the reality is, as a country, everybody is losing because of the prejudice that exist. We're not producing the number of engineers that India, that China, and other places are producing. We're not having the type of high quality education extended throughout the country. And as a result, we're falling further and further behind in the technology race, as well as in the skilled labor force race that is going to be needed. We will have to win it if we want to compete in a long-term basis. And you cannot have a situation where you're spending $400 billion in debt service. That means you're not investing in science, space, technology. You're not investing in higher education. You're not investing in housing. The debt is so crippling, and it's only going up. It's only going up. Look at this. Net interest costs will account for almost 40% of federal revenues by 2053. So 50% of every dollar that is collected in taxes will be going to debt service. Now, you explain to me how you're going to run a country when half of your revenue is going to debt service only, and there's no plan to decrease not only the debt, but to decrease the deficits. The deficits is what's adding to the debt, and there's no plan to, even next year, the year after. It would be one thing if we said, oh man, we've got a debt crisis. We've got to balance the budget and not make the thing worse, and hope that revenues over time help us pay down the debt. No, what we're doing is the opposite. I owe the credit card companies 10 grand that I can't pay them. Let me start to borrow another 1,000 grand a month. That's what Congress is doing to the American people. They are saying to the American people, we know we've borrowed more money than we can afford to sustain. And what we want you to do is to give us your okay so that we can borrow even more money and make the debt problem even bigger. That to me is a train wreck that nobody at the debate, there's nobody on the Democrat side, the Republican side, it's all the same thing. Just two sides of the same coin, neither of them talking about the train wreck that is occurring in our policy, in the fiscal policy. Let's talk about economic policy. We are engaged in a trade war with China. And the problem with this trade war is we are not in position to win it because of the prejudices in the education system, because of the fiefdoms and the special interests that have controlled the Congress. Congress has not invested in a way and has not structured the economy in a way that enables us to compete in some of the areas of emerging technology. China's automakers take the world by storm with the electric vehicle push. We say that electric vehicles are the path of the future. Well, if it's the way of the future, why didn't we invest in it? Why did we leave this area only to one or two companies to try to compete on a global stage? Why didn't we put the money into R&D and put the money into developing the engineers and the infrastructure so that electric vehicles, I'm sorry, I don't want a vehicle where I'm taking a road trip and I got to pull over for 8 hours. If I'm already driving 10, 12 hours, I'm not trying to sit on the side of the road for 2-3 hours to charge up my vehicle. The infrastructure is not there because we've not invested in it. We're spending too much of our money with debt service and with special interest kickbacks and with all of the pork that Congress provides, with all of the nonsensical. And as a result, we've fallen behind. And on top of that, you can complain that China is producing large numbers of EVs. And I had one viewer say, oh, these are low quality EVs or cheap EVs. Yeah, they're cheap, because that's what people want. Nobody wants a $120,000 commuter car. Nobody wants a vehicle, and you've seen the truth of the matter, because even Tesla has had to reduce its prices in recent days because there's a limited market of people who want to buy $100,000+ pickup truck. Whether it's gas, whether it's electric, it doesn't matter what it is. But especially if it's electric, and when that truck proves to have problems, that's why Ford has all of those electric pickup trucks sitting on the lot. You can go by there and get them. I mean, they're sitting there and they're hoping the executives are in the C-suite sweating, hoping these things will leave the lot. And the longer the more they hope and meet on it, the more those vehicles pile up because people don't want them. How China's car companies built so wide a lead in the race to make EVs. Just go out and look at it. The Chinese government invested. They set goals. They made a plan. They undergird these institutions. They were strategic and forward thinking in their decision to try to corner the EV market. And at the same time they were doing that, in the United States, we were arguing over bathrooms. In the United States, we're arguing now over who can win the golf tournament. In the United States, during the presidential debate, we're arguing about who slept with which actress, which adult actress or film star. In the United States, we're arguing about these things while China is making plants. Look at this. China using industrial robots at 12 times U.S. rate. You want to know why it's going to be difficult to stop China? Because China has invested in the technology that will lead to greater manufacturing strength and to greater production. They have strategically invested in these areas that they know and the world knows. When you're investing in AI, when you're investing in EV, when you're investing in solar and renewable energy at the rate that China is doing, it's going to be hard for the United States to try to stop China from becoming a greater superpower. It's already a superpower, but it will become a greater superpower. And instead of trying to stop China, wouldn't it be better to try to invest in America? That's the counterweight is not to stop the opposition, but it is to grow your capacity, grow your EV industry, grow your EV infrastructure, grow your renewable energy industry by making strategic investments, cutting out so much of the waste, the pork, cutting out so much of the corruption, the blatant corruption in the bills that are being passed by Congress that favor special interests over the interest of the masses, perhaps investing in education and the preparing of a new workforce would be far better than trying to stop China. You know, nobody was mad at China when they were making little cute robots and little cute electric, microwaves and electric devices, radios and low cost. But when they started investing in high-tech manufacturing and using AI and robotics, now all of a sudden it's a crisis. Well, it was a crisis all along. It's just that the leadership in the United States has been asleep at the wheel. Totally asleep while the world is pushing forward. We're totally asleep. You can go to high schools within the United States and see a high school where 20% of the students go on to some type of post-secondary education. That means college, trade school, the military, or have some kind of job. And the other 80% of the students leave high school with no plan, no skills, no capacity, and then we complain that China is over manufacturing, that China is overproducing. How can you complain that China is achieving when you are allowing 80% of students in high schools in many of the cities around America to leave high school with no training? How are they going to compete with the engineers coming out of India? How are they going to compete? Our education system is so weak, we can't stop immigration because we need nurses to come here from overseas because we don't produce enough nurses. We need engineers to come here from overseas because we don't produce enough engineers. We need all of these professions to come here because we've not invested the debt, $400 billion a year. But what about the schools? What about pre-K? What about providing lunches? And they're arguing over all of this. And here we come to a situation where we're struggling in America. This is a train wreck. There's no other way for me to put it. There's no other, if you watch that debate, and it's not about the individuals, it's about the lack of substance on the issues that matter most. It's about the lack of substance on what it's going to take to bring us out of this disaster that is our current leadership crisis in America. That's the real problem. And until we address that, we will see China and others rising. And we will see a continued decline of the United States as it pertains to our economic situation, our fiscal situation, our military situation, our foreign policy situation, and all of these talking heads that keep getting on TV telling everyone things are right. All of the media that never want to report on any of these crises that are taking place in America, this slow-moving train wreck that we are all seeing. Those of us who are looking at the data, who are watching this thing, the media never wants to report this. When was the last time you saw a special in the media about the United States deficit and debt? When was the last time you saw a full special about how education is collapsing throughout this country and making us less competitive? When was the last time you saw a special that talked about what the outcomes actually will be for the Ukraine war? What was the goal from the beginning? And did we achieve those goals, or are we finding ourselves just adrift in this disastrous conflict? You never hear the media talk about it. They try to bring it up and in the debate, but the debate was more about personality, personal aspiration, and who had the best golf score. And you can see that this is becoming a nation in decline. We are swiftly becoming that. I want to thank all of you
Introducing
for watching.
Vision Global News Network's Access Pass, your exclusive gateway to in-depth analysis you won't find anywhere else. Access Pass isn't just about watching the news, it's about joining a community. Engage with exclusive member-only forums, get recognized for your insights, and influence the conversation. Go beyond the headlines. Member-only live streams with award-winning journalists and economists answer your burning questions in real time. Access Pass membership unlocks exclusive benefits, discounts on merchandise, invitations to special events, and much more. Empower yourself with knowledge. Navigate the complexities of the world with confidence. Vision Global News Network's Access Pass, the key to a deeper understanding. Join the Access Pass community. The world is waiting. Are you ready? What if I told you that China is likely to be the world's largest economy by 2035? Yes, you heard it right. This isn't a mere speculation, but a prediction backed by a report from an international think tank. The think tank, a collaboration of scholars from 5 countries, the United States, Russia, Canada, India, and China, suggests a fascinating shift in the global economic power balance. China's GDP is on track to surpass that of the United States, crowning the country as the world's largest economy around 2035. It's a remarkable projection, one that indicates China's promising growth can carry the world economy forward. But how is this feat possible, you may ask? The answer lies in the concept of sustained and cumulative compounding interest, a principle often associated with finance and growth. Like an acorn growing into a towering oak, China's economy is expected to flourish under the gradual realization of high-quality development and the cultivation of new quality productive forces. This ambitious projection, part of 10 visions for China in 2035, was released during an international symposium. The report suggests that if China maintains an annual GDP growth of about 5% in the next few years, and at least 4% until 2035, it will overtake the United States as the world's top economy with a high probability. Interestingly, the vision is rooted in China's faster economic growth than the US, the continuous appreciation of the yuan, its increased internationalization, and the long-term bullish outlook for the yuan against the US dollar. The report also highlights the role of developing countries as the core engine of global economic growth, with their high growth rates potentially doubling global GDP in the next decade. A future where the dragon rises to the top. Quite an intriguing prospect, wouldn't you agree? A vision for 2035, you ask? Let me share it with you. Picture a world where China sits at the helm of the global economy, having surpassed the United States to claim the title of the world's largest economy. And this is not just a wild guess. It is an ambitious projection from a joint research report by a distinguished think tank team from 5 countries: the United States, Russia, Canada, India, and China. This vision is rooted in the belief in China's potential for sustained and steady growth momentum. The country has been consistently meeting and exceeding its annual GDP growth targets, and if it maintains this trajectory, it will likely continue to do so. The year 2024 is especially noteworthy, with China setting a growth target of around 5% for its economy, a figure that has surpassed the expectations of many international institutions. So, the 2035 vision is not merely a dream, but a potential reality. It's a reality that is grounded in solid economic principles and backed by a steadfast commitment to long-term growth. As we look towards the future, it's a vision that paints a compelling picture of what the global economic landscape could look like in just over a decade. A shift of power is on the horizon, and it's not just about China. The global economy is poised for a dramatic transformation. As per a report from a multinational think tank, developing countries are expected to become the driving force of global economic growth. In fact, their robust growth rates could potentially double global GDP in the next decade. China, the rising economic titan, provides a compelling example of this power shift. The country's economic performance in 2023 was nothing short of impressive. It achieved a year-on-year growth of 5.2%, outperforming its official target of about 5%. This accomplishment, in the face of numerous challenges, was heralded as a hard-won victory. Moving forward, China has set its sights even higher. For 2024, the country has established a growth target of about 5% for its economy. This ambitious goal has exceeded the expectations of several international institutions. The confidence emanates from China's investment efficiency, which outpaces that of the United States. If China invests about 40% of its GDP, it's projected that the country's GDP growth will hit the 5% mark. But let's not forget, this is not just about China. This shift of power underscores the emerging significance of developing countries in the global economic landscape. They are no longer mere spectators but active contributors to global growth. Their high growth rates, if sustained, could bring about a doubling of the global GDP in the next decade. This transformation is not without its challenges, but these countries have shown resilience and adaptability in the face of adversity. The tools to navigate these challenges are within their reach, and their potential for growth is immense. The global economic landscape is changing, and developing countries are at the helm. The shifting tides of economic power are carving a new path for prosperity, and the world is keenly watching this fascinating evolution unfold. Efficiency and challenges, two sides of the same coin, wouldn't you say? Let's delve into China's economic prowess, particularly its efficient investment strategy. It's an interesting point raised by John Ross, a senior fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies. He asserts that China's investment is much more efficient than that of the United States. To put it in perspective, if China invests about 40% of its GDP, it's predicted that the country's GDP growth will hit 5%. This is a rate that would significantly outpace both the US and the European Union, based on last year's data. Therefore, China continues to be the main driver of world economic growth, as it has been for the past 4 decades. Now let's flip the coin and look at the challenges. It's not all smooth sailing ahead. Marco Fernandez, a Beijing-based Brazilian researcher, points out that the Chinese economy will have to face hurdles. These include overcapacity and a shift from an economic model that's more dependent on infrastructure and real estate to one that's more reliant on high technology. These challenges aren't trivial. Overcapacity can lead to wasteful investment and a potential economic slowdown, while a shift in the economic model requires significant changes in skills, industries, and infrastructure. However, Fernandez seems optimistic, suggesting that despite the challenges, China has many tools at its disposal to deal with them, more so than the West. It's a delicate balancing act, isn't it? On one hand, we have an efficient investment strategy that is propelling China towards becoming the world's largest economy. On the other hand, we have significant challenges that could potentially slow this growth. But as the saying goes, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. And it seems China is well poised to seize these opportunities. Challenges are part of the journey, but it seems China has the tools to overcome them. What are these tools that China possesses, one might wonder? Well, let's delve into the toolbox and examine the instruments that have positioned China on its trajectory towards becoming the world's largest economy. Firstly, there's China's efficiency in investment. As noted by John Ross, senior fellow at the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies, China's investment is significantly more efficient than that of the United States. If China invests about 40% of its GDP, it's projected that China's GDP growth will reach 5%. This means that China's economic growth rate will largely exceed that of the US and the European Union based on last year's data. Secondly, China has demonstrated remarkable adaptability and resilience in the face of economic challenges. The country's economy has had to navigate the shifting sands of overcapacity and a transition from an infrastructure and real estate-based model to one that's more focused on high technology. Despite these challenges, China has consistently exceeded its growth targets, a testament to its economic strength and agility. Lastly, China's economic growth isn't just about numbers, it's about the quality of growth. The country is consciously cultivating and developing new quality productive forces, focusing on high-quality development. This approach is akin to the compounding interest that slowly but surely builds up over time, leading to substantial growth in the long run. Marco Fernandes, a Beijing-based Brazilian researcher at the Tri-Continental Institute for Social Research, suggested that China has many tools to deal with economic challenges, much more than the West has. This, coupled with China's continuous appreciation of the yuan and its increased internationalization, gives the country a strong footing in its quest to become the world's top economy. So, there you have it. China's toolbox for economic success is equipped with efficient investment, resilience, and a focus on high-quality development. These are not just tools, but strategic assets that have propelled the country's staggering economic growth. And so, the dragon prepares to take flight, equipped with the tools for success. Introducing Vision Global News Network's Access Pass, your exclusive gateway to in-depth analysis you won't find anywhere else. Access Pass isn't just about watching the news, it's about joining a community. Engage with exclusive member-only forums, get recognized for your insights, and influence the conversation. Go beyond the headlines. Member-only live streams with award-winning journalists and economists answer your burning questions in real time. Access Pass membership unlocks exclusive benefits. Discounts on merchandise, invitations to special events, and much more. Empower yourself with knowledge. Navigate the complexities of the world with confidence. Vision Global News Network's Access Pass, the key to a deeper understanding. Join the Access Pass community. The world is waiting. Are you ready?